So, I thought I'd start with the really big picture slide. This is, how do you get the outcome? How do you get ethical behavior? Well, the important vision that I want you to have when you think about ethics is that it's kind of a head and heart thing. You're not going to get all the way to actual ethical behavior just by taking a class. I think probably you would have guessed that. I can sit here and talk about Kant and Aristotle and all those guys all day long. It's not necessarily going to make anyone who listens to me be ethical, even if they stay awake. But moral reasoning is important, nevertheless. You do have to have some grounding in a theory. You do have to have some understanding of the process that you're using to get to an ethical conclusion. Now, people talk about going with their gut, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you want to understand really what's behind that gut reaction. If you have a response, we like to kind of fancy it up and call it a moral intuition instead of going with your gut. But if you have a moral intuition that something is wrong or something is necessary or morally obligatory, we want to try to get behind that, kind of unpack it a little bit and understand, where is that instinct coming from? Can we draw a principle out of that you can apply in another case that might help you out when you're facing something that is more uncertain, where your gut isn't sure which way to go? So the moral theory piece, which is where we're going to start the day, is hopefully somewhat familiar in, again, this instinctual sense, but some new material that you might find useful, tools, if you will, for you. But then as we move on after our first break to character, this is really the piece that you cannot do without, because if you don't have the character to do the right thing, again, knowing the right thing is really irrelevant. I mean, think about all of the big scandals and crises that people have splashed across the news that have to do with ethical failures. And ask yourself, how many of them do you think come down to the people involved actually not knowing that their actions were wrong? What do y'all think? You think a lot of them come down to they really didn't know that was wrong? Enron, sex scandals, all these things. I didn't reason correctly. I thought it was fine. What do y'all think? Not really? So there's that character piece. It's pretty important. Knowing the right thing from the wrong thing sometimes is very complicated, but a lot of times you can get that far. But the tricky bit is, okay, I know what's right and wrong. How do I get myself to do the right thing? So we have to look at the character piece. We have to talk about what are the influences, what are the pressures that might lead an otherwise good person to go off the rails and do something that they know darn well is wrong. Or the other side of that is, what are the really dangerous, and I use that word, dangerous character flaws that people might have that you interact with. People you interact with might have these flaws that might negatively influence you and lead you to do something that is normally not in your character. So you're identifying both flaws that might happen in otherwise good people, and quite frankly, trying to recognize bad people and know how they might distract you from trying to stay closer to those values on the upper corner there. So moral reasoning plus character gets you ethical behavior. If you reason incorrectly, you're going to do the wrong thing. And if you don't have the character, you're not going to have the strength to do the right thing. So you need them both. Now, big picture stuff. Understanding ethics, if you want to boil it down, it really comes to a kind of a tug-of-war between principles and consequences. Now, ethics is an ancient study. This goes certainly back to the ancient world. Every religion struggles with ethics, how to lead a good life, what makes a life worth living, what is worth dying for, all the big questions. But in the end, if you kind of whittle all that down, you do come to this fundamental question, and you'll find people on both sides of this issue. Is ethical reasoning, is finding out what is the right thing to do, a matter of determining key principles, rules, if you will, And once you know what those rules are, you stick to them and you're fine. Or is it about consequences, where you really have to look at the context, you really have to look at the outcomes that are going to happen based on what you do, and make sure that those outcomes are positive, that they are going to bring about something that you can live with. So as you look at these two choices, consequentialist moral reasoning, which has a very strong following, it's most often thought of as a particular school of philosophy called utilitarianism. And it's the idea that, and this will, I think, ring a lot of bells, but greatest good for the greatest number. That's utilitarian reasoning. How do I determine what the right thing to do is? I take into account all the stakeholders, anyone affected by the action, and I determine, well, if I have two choices, choice A, how does this affect those people? Choice B, how does that affect those people? And I choose the one that brings about the greatest good. What possible concerns do any of you have about consequentialism as described there? Yes, sir?
There's no way to know all the players.
No way to know all the players. And that is such an important point because it's true both in the moment and across time. In a particular moment, you may not be able to discern how many people and which people are going to truly be affected by your action. Who are you truly influencing by this action? But if you look across time, it gets even worse. I could make a decision that in the short term is wonderful for everyone immediately affected, but down the line is going to cause a great deal of harm to maybe much larger groups of people. So, you know, that is a concern.